This week, we talked to Joe Yevoli, '02 ACC Rookie of the Year, a two-time All-American, 2003 national champion with UVA, and former MLL pro. We'll be talking about being young and dumb, about John Desko having no soul, and about Bill Tierney feigning empathy for his fellow man. Enjoy.
I don't know if all lacrosse players feel this way, but I look back on my time in college, and for lack of a better term, I regret a lot of it. And I would like to talk about, I feel like I wish that I had somebody who would sit down and talk to me about what you're supposed to be doing in college before I actually went to college. I feel like I never got that, right? And I almost sort of, for lack of a better term, I almost sort of want to, talk to younger kids and be like, hey, if I could do it all over again, here's what I would do. So maybe think about it a little bit more before you actually go, because they'll be better for it.
Have at it. Explain your side of that, because that's going to be hugely valuable to young kids, especially.
It was about the right type of guidance, right? I grew up my entire life, as anybody who knows me or does even a quick Google search for my name will recognize that, I love my dad and he was my idol. But there were, things that, he lacked as well. And what he lacked, I ended up lacking. And I never actually realized this until, I got older and I was on my own. My dad understood sports. He was a great athlete himself. He knew from almost the moment that I was born that, if I was going to be able to afford college, not to say that we were poor or anything like that, but if I was going to be able to afford college, it would probably have to be on some sort of, full scholarship or scholarship for lacrosse. And he set me on that direction when I was very young. And that meant, the typical, for lack of a better term, training regimen, right? Like go to the wall, go up and shoot. When he turns 14, let's teach him, how to go to the gym, things like that. And I was really, really lucky and fortunate to have somebody in my life that actually pointed me in that direction. And I feel bad for my brothers, my brothers and my sister who didn't really get that because my dad passed away in 2006. Conversely, I see the other side where I got the lacrosse training and, sort of the athletic side of training. I look at my brothers and my sister, and they got probably better EQ or intellectual training, right? Where, for me, it never really clicked in that why school is important. And it never really clicked in why you should be thinking, about your future in some sense, right? Like not plan out the next 50 years, but really think about what you like and what you want to do and what's important to you. And whether it's set goals or whatever, just learn the things that are important to life, in terms of time management and things like that. And my dad never really taught me that stuff, and I never really learned it. And I wish that I wish that I had. I wish that I had somebody who, not to say that nobody ever told me this, but I wish that I knew enough to listen to the people who were telling me that, grades are important. Time management is important. EQ is important. And I remember some of the people that I talked to in the lacrosse community, literally in high school, telling me hey, listen, once you get accepted to college, grades don't matter. Don't worry about your grades. And I took that as being okay, great. I won't worry about my grades. That sounds awesome. And I regret that.
One of the things I was curious with, you're talking about your father training you up was, mine was completely unfocused. So did he pretty much just get you there, and was it, or was there focused things that he did, being that he was an athlete? Because I had nothing. I had the wall and the cage, and that was it. There was no YouTube. There was no looking up Paul Rabel and checking out this video on how to shoot down the alley. And so I was curious as to that. You talked about chucking balls at him and things of that sort. So what kind of, especially being that you're a finisher. So, what did that look like when you were a kid, and how did he help prepare you for that?
Yeah, I feel like I do need to clear one thing up. I think I remember that somebody definitely wrote, somebody who I did an interview for wrote that my dad would step in the cage and I would shoot at him, which is just incorrect.
Not true.
Not true. Not true at all. No, my dad was super focused in terms of teaching me what I needed to know in terms of sports. And my dad was a great dad overall, right? I love the guy. He did everything that he possibly could for me. He would think back on his athletic career, and he would basically have me do the exact same things that he did, right? So he got good at playing basketball by going up to the park and playing against the kids at the park pretty much any time that he had free, right? So I ended up doing the same, and a lot of it was him not forcing, but like trying to influence me to do that, always reminding me to go and do that, right? So I learned how to play basketball, and by that I learned a lot of lacrosse skills through basketball by playing up at Burns Park constantly. The other side of that is, he would tell me to bring my stick so that when I stopped playing basketball, I can go have 30 minutes to an hour on the wall. And then I'd say maybe once a week, pretty much every week for the entire time that, from 7th grade on, he would, say, hey, let's get in the car and let's go up to the field and we're going to shoot around. And he would just basically make up drills that, he thought would help. So yeah, he was pretty focused, and he would always, try to influence me to go do a little bit more work. The flip side of that is, because I had somebody pushing me, it took me a while to realize, I never really realized it until he got sick, that sort of influence also needed to come from me, right? Like I needed to want to go up to the field. I needed to want to go up and play basketball. I needed to want to go to the wall. And I needed to learn the self-discipline to be able to do that, because I was always relying on him to push me. So that's something that I wish that I had, while he was focused, I wish that he had figured out a way to, maybe develop that in me a little bit at an earlier age. Cause I literally didn't learn that until my 5th year of college. And it wasn't until he got sick that really motivated me to be like, you know what, I need to do this. I need to be able to do this for myself.
Yep. As a coach, we saw it a lot where a lot of the kids that had plateaued early, they developed young. They were good in 7th and 8th grade, 6th grade. They were good youth players and continued to be good through high school. A lot of them had those parents that, sometimes the parents are coaching them up right. Sometimes they're pushing them the right way. Sometimes they're pushing them a little too hard. So we'd have a lot of kids, especially at the junior college level, that we would get in that we expected these kids to just be amazing. We expected them to be very coachable. And a lot of the kids, it's kind of like what you said. They thought that a coach was a magical fairy that was just going to make everything work and was going to make them better and was going to make everything all right. And when it didn't happen, because they didn't, I'm not their dad. So I wasn't able to motivate some of these kids the same way that their parent would, just out of fear. So when they didn't put that hard work in, and then they didn't get better over the course of that year or 2 year period, there was a bunch of kids that, thought that was my bad. I'm a terrible coach. I didn't make this kid better. Yet we had the kids that were mediocre players in high school that slowly but surely developed into, studs for us, because they came with a completely different attitude, didn't look to us for anything. We could be idiots. And that's what I used to try to tell kids. You don't have to agree with us. You could actually know for a fact that this offensive scheme that we're putting in is completely wrong. But if everybody just bought in and just shut the hell up and just did what we said, and you guys all tried on your own and kind of just worried about your own crap, it wouldn't matter if our system or our scheme wasn't right. If everybody was on the same page, we're going to be better off.
Yeah, it's it takes a level of self-reflection to be to be honest about that stuff, right? And I think back to when I was in school. And I don't know if it was ego or just, ego or stupidity or, I just really didn't put the time and thought into it. But I mean, I had always gotten by my entire athletic career, pretty much by pure athleticism, right? Like I, I studied lacrosse, but I studied my side of lacrosse. I didn't learn the full team aspect. I didn't learn, you know, I didn't learn lacrosse situations. I mean, I sort of picked this up sort of secondhand by playing, right? You play and you sort of develop your own lacrosse IQ. But I really wish that I had been smart enough, humble enough to be back at school and maybe, taken some time to pull, Coach Van aside and say like, hey, I'm a freshman. I have a long way to go through, in the first week that I've been here. What do you see that I need to do to improve my game? And then on top of that, what role should I fill on this team? And how can you show it to me in a way that's going to help me not only reach my full potential, but the team's full potential? I had never thought that way. And I really wish that I had, and I really wish that I had come across somebody who might have made me realize that that should be the way that I'm thinking, or should be the way that I should think.
And you're talking at your freshman year at Virginia?
I am.
And you end up winning the ACC Rookie of the Year. So, I mean,
Right.
that's one of the intriguing things I find here is that I could tell that you, in a bunch of the podcasts that I listened to, that you had regrets, that you wished you could, not necessarily have a do-over, that's going a little deep into it, but just,
Right.
You would change things if you could. And considering the high level that you played at, because I'm looking at stats, 130 points over 3 years at Virginia, and 42. I don't know if those are accurate. I yanked them from the websites, but 42 points at Syracuse. And I remember them all. I had just gotten back, when you're in your playing days, and I'm playing college ball, you don't watch as much college ball. By your playing days, I was coaching, watching every game that I could possibly find on TV. So
Right.
you were a Cuse killer. Like I was looking at one of the stats, and you put up 14 goals on Syracuse in 4 games with at least a hat trick in all of them.
Right.
And then you end up going to play there. So that was one of the things I was going to ask, and I think you saw was I had that experience where certain teams you just match up better against and you just shred them. What was that all about? Because obviously that's a good chunk of your points that season, or not that season, but over your career against just one team. What was it about Syracuse that allowed you to just completely ravage them?
Right. So the first year, so I accused people aren't going to like this, but let's.
I'm a Cuse guy,
perfectly
so
honest,
and I am going to like it because I'm a Cuse guy, but I'm also a coach that appreciates the rivalries that go into these teams. And I mean, I know as a Virginia freshman, you had to be pumped for that, and you had to despise everything that Syracuse stood for at that stage in your career.
Right. Well, I mean, to be honest, to call a spade a spade, it's gotten a lot better over the years. But when I was playing, Syracuse had incredible individual athletes, especially on defense. But they were less organized than most teams, less disciplined as a team defense, I would say. Again, people might totally disagree with me, but that's sort of the way that I felt. The first year, I did so well against them. Partially, because of the lack of discipline. Not to say that they were all over the place, but they're just not as tight a defense as say a Princeton.
Yeah.
And we had, one of the best feeders in the history of college lacrosse, Connor Gill, on my team, right? So everybody focused on him, and I was smart enough to realize, like, all right, let's think about this. This guy is one of the best assistmen in the history of college lacrosse. What should I do? Probably try to get open.
Yep.
And that's basically what I did. And that for that first year, that worked very well against Syracuse because if you had any sense of how to find open field, in lacrosse, which I think that's one of my strong suits is I can find the open spot. You were gonna and you can finish. You were gonna put some points on the board. So I bet you if you look back on, I think I had 7 goals against Syracuse that first year, during the regular season and then in the playoffs. I'd say 5 of them were off of assists from Connor Gill. So that's my first year. And then the second and third year, sort of more of the same, but I became a little bit more experienced, and I was able to create things off the dodge for myself. My second and more so my second year. I got hurt my third year, but again, when you play a defense like that, that's pure athleticism. And not say that they're not team focused, but they were less so than, again, like a Princeton. You're just able to find holes in their defense, and I was able to find that. And I remember Coach Simmons. I think I had I think early on in my 5th year, my first year at Syracuse, or my only year at Syracuse, I scored my 100 career point. I walked off the field and everybody congratulated me, and then Coach Simmons said, "Yeah, 14 of those were against us."
Yeah.
But yeah, it was it was just basically they were a little less disciplined than most defenses, and it was a run and gun style. So we played that way, they played that way. So I was able to get lucky and and find the holes in their defense occasionally.
And that segues into the whole defense part. I was talking to someone last night. You kind of played at the end of an era before Tierney. I would jokingly say that Tierney ruined lacrosse in the sense that he really did. He was the father or the grandfather of really pushing that total team defensive scheme. He found a way to teach this to these kids that resulted in 5 guys rotating on the defensive side of the ball to cover everything. And
Right.
it slowed the game down a great deal. And that kind of changed everything, where tons of teams start playing that style of ball. And even just in that era and coming out of college, I know once you come out of college, you become very critical, both high school and college, you become critical of the people behind you. Once you got out, fast forward 5 years, what did the flow and the speed of the game and how that all changed? How did you feel about that?
Well, so the biggest thing that I can say was that, I mean, you said it. I played at the end of an era when, there were only a few run and gun teams left. And I got to experience both sides of the coin, right? Like the Syracuse Virginia games, they were always run and gun, and they were the most fun probably I've had playing lacrosse my entire college career. And then we got to play games against Princeton where, we would win or they would win 6-5. I got to see both sides of the coin. The biggest thing was when I went to the MLL, and they introduced the shot clock, when I realized how much I was missing that run and gun style of play, because it's even more so than when you play at a Syracuse. Syracuse has they have the stigma that they're run and gun, and that they're a little freewheeling. But I got to be honest, Coach Desko and Coach Donahue, they were also pretty. They were strict about what they wanted to be done on offense, and there was still some sort of level of control that they exerted over the players. They definitely let them play the way they wanted to play, but they always, they definitely still were like, all right, here's our offense and here's what we expect from you guys, right? And that's good. I think that should happen. But when you get to the MLL, especially because, you're only practicing once a week, the offense is loosely structured, and you have a 60-second shot clock. So the ball is up and down the field constantly, and I love that style of play. I miss it. To be honest, I've watched very little college lacrosse over the past couple of years, and it is because things have gotten really slow and less exciting for me. When I watched lacrosse when I was younger, again, it was the 15 and 16, 17 to 18. Some of the really early Syracuse Virginia games were, 22 to 20.
Yep.
And those are the games that I like. And now you turn on college lacrosse and you will literally see games that are 5-4.
There's times where I'll watch it on Watch ESPN and I'll forward just to goals, because there really is, like, especially just to forward 30 seconds through the beginning of every possession. That's what kills me about the college game, is that every possession starts with 30 seconds of to not be graphic.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely had to deal with that. We had our first string midfield, and they rarely played defense. They only played defense when they had to. And whenever we would get the ball up our side of the field, some years I was the quarterback of the offense. So when I would get the ball, I'd know to stand behind the crease, or, run behind the cage, while we're subbing in our offense. Right. And, the thing is the rules of the game, I understand why they did it. I understand why coaches have this perspective of, we only have, like, each possession is important, and we want to make the most of every single one. And the more control we have over the ball, the better we're going to be. I get that. But it's not the sport that I grew up playing and that I loved, and that led to such a rise of popularity over the years. And I think that we need to address the reality that things are slowing down, and it sounds like they are. But we need to look at some rules that will speed up the pace of play, which it looks like, because I keep my eye on the game of lacrosse. It looks like they're leaning in that direction. They're trying to figure out how to make the play a little faster.
My pushback against the shot clock was always, well, it didn't work for the MLL. Why ruin the college game with it? The best proposal I saw was a 90-second shot clock at the point that the defense gains possession. All this crap about the shot clock starting when they touch it up, that's stupid. In the fall, they tried it, and it ended up being teams would stall for 30 seconds before touching it up in the box, and then they'd get their full 60 after that. So they were still getting 90. And no other sport in the world has a shot clock that doesn't start when the defensive team gains possession. So I think 90 seconds from the time the defensive team gains possession, and bring back the dive. One of the problems with the way the shot clock lives in the college game now is it's arbitrary. If you got a team that plays a zone, the officials aren't versed enough in lacrosse to know, hey, we've got to give these guys 2.5 minutes of a possession to try to figure this zone out and get a good shot off, versus when you're playing man, you don't need that amount of time. So I always felt like teams that could box it in against a team to try to slow the ball down here and there and to try to force outside shots, it would favor that team statistically. Whereas if you bring back the dive, it prevents that from happening. Now teams have to honor the guy at X. They can't play 6 guys out front guarding goal line extended. You can dive across the crease like you could in the old days when I played. I think that they still had the dive probably in your days, at least high school. It negates the zone, because now you have to put at least a man back there to cover him all the time, so that he can't short that zone on the inside going underneath. And it makes everything, it keeps everybody honest. And the average possession is already under 90 seconds. So the scenarios in which someone's just rolling the ball into the corner would almost not affect the game negatively in any way, because people are already getting their shots off inside that time. But it still speeds the game up, because you won't have those teams that are taking the air out of the ball for 2.5-3 minutes before they put the stall warning on them. So that's the only scenario in which I could see enjoying that. But it's a tough call. Nobody wants to see their game changed. Right.
Yeah, that is true. To be honest, what I would like to see is, one, I think, the implementation of the shot clock in terms of the shot needs to be on cage. I think that's, and maybe something that I don't, but and I'm sure there might be a good explanation for this, but for me, it never made sense to me why the shot had to be on cage in order to reset the shot clock. I can understand that, maybe they're thinking, well, people will be taking, like fake or outrageous shots in order to reset the shot clock. I think that they'll be able to delineate between a real shot and a fake shot. And I think the refs can make that call since they're already making the call about, when you take a shot and it's backed up by a player, the ball goes to the team who's closest rather than switching possessions. I think like if you can think about how to do that correctly, I think that might do away with some of the roll the ball in the corner stuff.
Yep.
And in terms of the dive, so I never really played. They changed the dive, I think, in like 97. I might be off by a year or so. So I never really played lacrosse where it factored into my game because it was pretty much always illegal when I played. When I played in the MLL, it definitely did help me get off more shots. I can't really say for sure if it would have changed my game if I had played with it my entire life. Instinctively, I want to say, yeah, bring back the dive, but also I don't really know what the numbers are in terms of how many kids were getting hurt because of that rule.
That's the reason they got rid of it. I know is there was a couple of whether there was an actual injury or worry about injury. I know that's what and I think the reason they're talking about bringing it back is because now, fast forward, we've got 15 years of MLL ball more. And with the dive being in place completely, and they haven't had those incidents of injuries that I think they were worried about.
If that's the case, then I'm all for it. But I can tell you. So my freshman year, I'd say the second week that I was at UVA, one of the assistant coaches brought me and John Christmas up to the office to show me video of Doug Knight, Michael Watson, that attack line, which is one of the best probably the best attack line in the history of college lacrosse.
I would agree.
And those guys, literally, if they had 100 goals, I'd say 60 of them were dives. These guys did not care about the health of their bodies at all. And they literally showed us a highlight reel where everything that they did, every goal that they had was them diving into the crease and getting absolutely destroyed by either the goalie or a sliding defenseman or the defenseman that was on them, getting pinned between the cage. I watched that and, the coach at the time was like, this is how we'd like you to play. And in my mind, it's like, I don't want to do that. That looks absolutely brutal. And I didn't understand how those guys didn't hurt themselves. If somebody can show me numbers that I guess you raise a good point where they had it in the MLL for years and not a lot of people were getting hurt. I would support bringing it back, but they removed it for a reason. So I'm hesitant, without knowing the numbers, I'm hesitant to say we should bring it back because it seems like a lot of kids, especially young kids, will get hurt if the rules brought back.
Yeah, and with the MLL, it's a bad comparison because you're dealing with the elitist athletes in the game. At that not just physically, but mentally. So they're going to be a little bit more aware of that angle. They're going to be a little bit more compassionate about this goalie that they know has to return back to Wall Street on Monday morning. Because I suspect still to this day, almost every MLL player has a real day job. On the side outside of the bigger guys, even the bigger guys.
And to be honest, I want to touch on that point if it's okay, because you mentioned that you don't really have a team that you follow as obsessively as Syracuse in the MLL. I honestly I've written this before. Very, very few people have actually seen it, but I really think that the MLL is making a mistake in the way that they sort of market the game, especially the way they market the league itself. I think, like you said, a lot of the players, very, very few do lacrosse full time. Most of them, majority of them, are teachers or they work on Wall Street and they have day jobs. And some of them literally work in New York 5 days a week and then fly out to Denver or Chicago to practice either that Friday night or Saturday morning to play a game on Saturday and fly back on Sunday. And I don't think it's any secret that Major League Lacrosse players don't make NBA money. So very few people are playing this for the salary. And I think if you were to ask a lot of Major League Lacrosse players why they do it, they still play lacrosse because they love lacrosse. It's something that they grew up with. They care a lot about the sport. They want to continue to advance it, and they deeply, deeply care about the sport. And I want to see more of that. I want to see advertisements where it's, some players who, demonstrate that. Like, listen, like I have a 9-to-5 job and I still make time during my day to play because I love the sport. I want to grow it. And I want to make it so that maybe a younger kid who's watching the game now could make $1 million in the MLL in a few years. Like, yep. I think there's something there that they're missing. And I think back to, early MLB days, right? Where even somebody like Mickey Mantle, right? Who's one of the best, is arguably the best baseball player of all time, didn't make enough during his playing days to support him throughout the rest of his life. He played the game definitely for the money, don't get me wrong, but he did it because he loved the game. And a lot of those players playing them did it because they love the game. They love baseball. And that's why, in my mind, in my opinion, that's why baseball caught on as America's national pastime, because it was a bunch of people who were playing a game that they loved precisely because they loved it. And I think, especially during today's day and age where you get a lot of people who look at NBA players and NFL players and they say, oh, they're spoiled, they're overpaid, they get to the MLL and it's all about the money, or sorry, they get to the NBA and it's all about the money. I've heard these sort of complaints before, and this is why people, stop watching professional sports in NBA and NFL. I think the MLL could be the professional league for people who really love the game. And I wish that they would focus on that more. I'd like to hear more about that.
And I'd like to see the players be players. One of my trepidations about getting into the whole talking to players things is that it seems it's so corporate. And I don't want to be that, oh, it's corporate, it's the machine, man. And I think one of the things that has always been great about lacrosse is it's been a sport of both dorks and flunkies and athletes and less, it's been a huge hodgepodge and a melting pot of people and personalities. Granted, you're past your pro days and everything, but it's like, what happens if I say shit? Is that a problem for the people that, for your interests and things of that sort? And I think that's part of it, is the players seem less real in terms of what the fans see from them.
To be honest, this is my opinion. I kind of want to get lacrosse away from bro culture.
Right. I would agree with that.
Yeah. For lack of a better way to put it, you know what? Listen, for any little kid that listens to this, I can say definitively that anybody that they look up to in the sport of lacrosse isn't the guy that's wearing pennies and backwards hats and, flip-flops and is, chugging beers and
with ear gauges.
Yeah. I guarantee you, anybody that you look up to, they're not that. The people who you look up to, I've met Kyle Harrison really quickly. Obviously, you have Paul Rabel. Even somebody like Mikey Powell. I think Mikey Powell is a phenomenal example. He's not really playing that much anymore. But when I was in college, he was a year older than me. When I was in college, I had heard stories about how Mike doesn't care about lacrosse and he's just so naturally good. And, I wish that I had his genes or his family lineage or whatever, right? When I got to Syracuse and I was talking to people who played with him, every one of them to a T would remark about how hard that guy worked off the field. And one weird thing about Mike that I heard, I can't back up myself, but one thing that I heard about Mike was that he didn't want people to know how hard he worked. He wouldn't work out in the Syracuse lacrosse weight room. He would work out at a gym off campus because he didn't want people to see him putting in that extra work. But he worked his ass off Paul Rabel works his ass off. Kyle Harrison works his ass off, and they still do to today. If you want to get to that next level, you have to have that mindset. You can't play lacrosse and be the bro, because you're going to peak at one point. You're never going to be able to get to the next level. The best players that I know, they were mature at a young age. They knew how to focus. They knew how to prioritize, and they knew how to manage their time. And they knew that they wanted to be as good as they possibly could be at lacrosse. So I hate when I see, this is a long time. I don't even know if this still exists, but when I was in college, you had the Warriors Players Club. I don't want to see that anymore. I really, really want to get lacrosse away from bro culture, because I think it ultimately hurts the game in the long run.
I would agree. And anybody that would try to say that Mike Powell was just naturally gifted and he could have been better than he was is stupid. All of their heroes, like you said, none of them were out partying. Not that they didn't have fun here and there, but most of these guys were bookworms to a degree, were in the gym more often than not, were always on the wall. They would always forego doing something fun. But it is crazy for people to think that that their idols are bros. I wanted to touch base going way back on you talked about the shot. We talked about the shot clock and the why they don't just let any shot count. And I think part of that is they're trying to take more out of officials' hands. I was an official. I've actually done everything. I've played. I've officiated. I started coaching when I was in 8th grade. And they're trying to not put more in the ref's hands. Part of the reason with the dive, if a player can't go in the crease, then the ref doesn't have to make a judgment call. When they took away the dive at first, the rule was your momentum couldn't even carry you in the crease. And that was an easier call for the officials. If he scored, even if the ball crossed the plane, if his momentum caused him to end up in the crease, they would wave him off early in that rule, and then they finally loosened it up to what it is now. But then that's still a judgment call. You're making a guy who's already got 10 things that he's got to worry about have to decide, okay, did this guy get pushed in the crease? Did this guy lean in the crease and fall in on his own? Or did he jump and put himself in his own momentum? Even the rule the way it is now has gotten overdeveloped, so they need to simplify it for him.
To me, that judgment call is already on the ref. They're already making the call whether or not it was a shot or not. So just continue letting them do that. Right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, they still have to.
But then you end up with, hey, was it a foot over the cage or was it 3? Like, just seeing some of the guys I had to ref with, some of these guys you don't want making that judgment call, even at the college level. I mean, the guys that we have here locally, the guys in my chapter, at the head of our chapter, are the guys that are doing all the, Albany Cuse games, are doing all the D3 and through D1 games in New York and down into Pennsylvania. And you don't want all these guys making that, because granted, they're good lacrosse officials and it's a tough gig, but it's also, they're not lacrosse players. Very few of these guys were lacrosse players to the point that they would understand all of that. It's just my argument. It'll be interesting to see what they do, but I think that it has to be 90 seconds. I think it has to start with the D and go from there.
90 seconds seems right. I could even see 75. I do think 60 is a little, that's not enough. Need a little bit more. But I would like to see some shot clock. I loved playing with a shot clock. I would love to see it come into the college game.
Did you want to talk more specifically about the situation that led you to transfer from Virginia into Syracuse?
Yeah, so I'll talk about anything you want to know about that situation, but a lot of it comes down to honestly just me being a immature 21-year-old. Some of it, there was definitely the thought of like, hey, my dad was sick. It would be nicer if I played somewhere closer to him, because he drove to every single game. 8 hours there, 8 hours back. Sometimes he wouldn't even stay overnight. He would drive to UVA and then drive back. When he got sick, it was starting to get a little tough for him. And part of it was like, well, if I played at a Hopkins or if I played at a Syracuse or a Maryland or something like that, it's going to be easier for him. But that was a small piece of the equation. To be honest, I got hurt my junior year. I was sour about that. Not at anybody at UVA, just sour in general. I was pretty mad that that was the that was the hand I've been dealt. I came back that fall. I had gotten some advice from a doctor that said, I would recommend that you at least take the fall off, possibly even the entire year off, because the more rest that you get for this type of injury, the better it's going to be. I felt that when I initially raised the idea of, hey, I'm going to take off the fall and possibly sit out the year, it was well received, and then as time moved on, it was less well received. That said, that more than it probably was in my head. And when I left, or when I decided to leave, it was just a level of, immaturity, not really understanding the correct way to behave in a situation like what was going on. I thought, you know what, let me just wipe the slate clean. It'd be nice to start off somewhere else. And I had the opportunity because I did graduate from UVA and I got into Syracuse to transfer to another school. Looking back, I've talked to Dom since then. I honestly think that, while I'm sure that he'd admit he made some mistakes, I would say that I made a lot of mistakes in that whole process as well. He treated me really well for 4 years, and I wish that I was mature enough to recognize that at the time, and I wish that I would have rewarded him or thanked him for that.
Yep.
And it just never really occurred to me that, me stepping out in the way that I did sort of is somewhat of a slap in the face to him, for all the things that he did. Coach Van and the other assistants. And the other thing that makes me really regret it too was, leaving Virginia was never about getting away from, the players on the team. It was about, getting closer to my dad, but also starting fresh. And there were a lot of really good guys on UVA that, again, it was me leaving. I'm sure a lot of them saw it as a slap in the face.
Yep.
And there's something to be said about loyalty that I especially respect at this, at the age that I am right now. And I wish that all those things would have focused into my decision-making process at the time. To their credit, I remember when we did the MLL Combine, and it was really the first time that I had an opportunity to talk to, a Matt Ward, Kyle Dixon, JJ Morrissey, Matt Puskay. I saw them at the Combine. I really expected them to not want to say a word to me. So I was a little uncomfortable, got into a situation where I was walking past them in the hallway and I sort of kept my head down, and somebody, I think it was Kyle Dixon, who said, "Hey, Joe." And I perked up because I was surprised that they even wanted to talk to me. And when I even said that, I said, "Oh man, I can't believe you guys are even saying hi to me." And they were like, "Yeah, why wouldn't we want to talk to you?"
Yep.
I remember just sort of being floored by that. They took the high road, they did the right thing. It really makes me wish that I would go back and handle it a little differently. That said, while I got a chance to play at Syracuse, which was an unbelievable thrill and an honor that I was allowed to play on that team. So I was sort of lucky that I got both experiences. I got to play in the Dome, for Syracuse lacrosse. But I wish that I had maybe a little less ego and a little bit more maturity when I was that age to recognize that leaving probably wasn't the best decision. Regardless of how that next year turned out, had I known that it was going to be a 17-0 season and maybe the best lacrosse team to ever play the game,
Right.
I wish that I could, I had a crystal ball, might have changed things a little bit, but wiping that out, I wish that I would have recognized, Dom was good to me. He definitely made some mistakes, but any coach would, any coach does. You're never going to get a perfect coach. Coach Van was really good to me. Even after I left, he was great to me. And the guys on the team were and they continue to be awesome people. And I wish that I would have recognized all that and said, you know what, I've committed to UVA. I'm going to honor my commitment, and I'm going to finish playing my time here.
Sometimes all it takes is that olive branch, especially for kids. I wouldn't hold the decision-making process against you, now knowing now what I know about brain development, and that, hey, at 18, 19, 22, your frontal cortex hasn't gone fully online, so you are literally nearly biologically incapable of making, completely smart decisions at that point, albeit,
that's for sure.
We're not going to cut ourselves that slack, I don't think.
Yeah.
One of the things that Scott Urich mentioned was Demeanor's Desco. John Desco's demeanor, his in-game demeanor. Early on in the days of Watch ESPN, I don't even know what it was called back then, ESPN 3 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
They were putting any game on that they could get a camera on. So there was a Cuse at Georgetown, no commentators, just a camera up in the press box going back and forth, and then they had a sideline camera in the huddles at timeouts. So this is like a one-goal game or a tie game going into like overtime, and Cuse has the ball. They're taking a timeout towards the end. He calmly told them what they needed to do in a manner that was concise, understandable, moved on to the next unit. Everyone good? Yeah. Everyone's good. They put their hands in, they break, they go out, and they win the game.
Yeah.
So what was that? Was that your experience, though? Was he always that cool?
Was he always that cool? No.
No.
Coach Desco, I'm sure he knows this, can fly off the handle when you do something stupid. But the one thing I will say about Coach Desco, let me just say straight off, I loved playing for Coach Desco. He's a great guy. He's a great players coach, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I don't know that I've met anybody. There's been very few people that I've met in my life who know more about lacrosse than Coach Desco does. I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves in terms of just pure lacrosse knowledge. And one of the things that I want to ask him, I want to get him on the show, and I want to ask him because I've heard this story. I don't know if it's actually true. So Syracuse runs a man-up play that they have little variations off of, but if during my senior year, if we had 50 man-up plays, 48 of them were the same play. And I'm not exaggerating, literally the exact same play. And from what I've heard, that's the same man-up play that they've been running for the past 30 years. And that's the same man-up play that Coach Desco created himself because when he was an assistant coach, Coach Simmons, Roy Simmons Jr. said, hey, we need a man-up play. And he said, all right. And he took an offense and a defense to a separate field at Syracuse for like 2 weeks straight, and they did nothing but experiment with different man-up and man-down plays. And he came back 2 weeks later, and he said, I got it. And it's Syracuse man-up play, which we still run to this day, and we run almost the exact same way, and it's impossible to stop.
Everybody runs it now, too. Are you talking about the play where the ball carrier will actually carry to the next position, crease pops out behind him, and the guy who's in the path of the ball carrier would go to the crease, and then they throw it back?
Yep, it's called carry to corner. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, it got to the point where when it was man up, whoever was coming on the field would tell me what the man up play was going to be. But it got to the point where at the end of the season, it was like, no, I know what it's going to be. Like, it was like, you don't need to tell me what the play is going to be because, you haven't changed it all year. Right. And I mean, I don't remember what our man up percentage was that year, but I know that it was pretty high. And they've been running the same play for the past 20 years. So anyway, I think Coach Desco is an underrated coach in the sense that he knows more about lacrosse than a lot of people do. That said, he was calm when he needed to be in high pressure situations. He could hold it together. when I made a mistake, he can look at you and yell at you in ways that made you feel like you were gonna die that he was gonna end your life if you step out of line again.
It's because he's a ginger and they have no souls.
He really, specifically it was I think it was the quarterfinals against Hopkins in Stony Brook, and I got an unsportsmanlike penalty because I said something to the ref, which I didn't think was that bad, but he was probably right. I got a 1 minute penalty and it was unreleasable, and we were up by 3. And I think Hopkins scored 2 goals while I was in the box, and Deska was right next to me. And every goal he would just turn to me, turn beet red, and just start screaming his head off at me. And I've never been more scared of a coach in my entire life. But yeah, at the same time, like you said, when we needed him to be calm, when we needed him to come up with a game plan, he would do it. He would compose himself. He'd keep the team calm. He knew how to do that. And I don't know how most people feel about this. I loved it. He was the only coach since my high school coach who, when I had a hot hand, there were a couple games where, for whatever reason, the matchup was good or whatever, I was just playing really well. It was the Hopkins game and I think the Albany game. They ended up shutting me off. But he was the only coach that would literally pull me aside and just say, whenever you get the ball, go to the cage. Like, the game plan is you have the hot hand, so go to the cage.
Do you think that's a holdover from Coach Simmons and things he learned from his era as being his longtime assistant?
Yeah, probably. And I think, I think Syracuse lacrosse struggled a little bit trying to figure out what to do when they don't have a Powell on the team. Yeah. They had Casey, then they had Ryan, then they had Mike. And all of a sudden it became like, all right, who's going to be the 22, who's going to be the leader, who's going to be the guy that we can just rely on all the time. And, they definitely had some players who could do that, but none of them were a Powell. None of them were as good as a Powell, or very few of them were as good as a Powell. And, I think they struggled with what to do in those situations where they didn't have somebody like that. But they were always looking for, okay, here's a situation where this guy, for whatever reason, and it wasn't always me, is controlling the pace of the game. And we need to pay attention to that because that's important. That's something that, lacrosse needs. And yeah, he pulled me aside and just be like, hey, Joe, just go to the cage. That was it. That was all he would say.
I think he's got a bum rap also because I think a lot of people, when you were a Cuse fan growing up, and us upstate New York guys are diehard Cuse fans in lacrosse because we grew up, all our high schools or when we were in youth club and things, they'd take bus loads of us up there. And, I grew up watching Virginia Cuse, Virginia Hopkins. I mean, I've seen some of the greatest games ever played growing up as a kid at the Dome with some of those old rivalries. And I think the changing of the guard happened in terms of just the talent naturally started spreading out. And so I think that when he came into being the coach at Syracuse, he did get to enjoy a Powell and a couple of those players that are just once-in-a-lifetime talents. And those players started going other places, especially upstate New York, where Albany starts picking up a couple of the natives and the Canadians and things like that normally would have just gone to Syracuse without thinking about it. And I think he took the blame for that when it wasn't really fair to put the blame. That was happening everywhere. Hopkins wasn't getting the kids from Baltimore that they would normally keep home. And same for Virginia. All of the big schools, they started losing talent to other teams. Right. But I think the biggest thing with him is how he's developed that talent. You look at the years that I was hopeful this year was going to be similar to the year where Cuse we didn't know who was going to be the stars on attack, and it ends up being you got a guy like Donahue who had transferred in from Air Force. He wasn't supposed to be at least he wasn't even on our radar outside of, hey, we knew that his dad was a coach and everything like that, and then that kid ends up having a ridiculous career, and Rice that same season. So I think that's what he's done an amazing job, and maybe that speaks to what you said about him just being a brilliant mind and teacher of the game, is that he hasn't had the talent that he used to get, just the raw talent, but look what he's done in terms of turning players like Donahue and Rice and Salcido last year and Mariano into All-Americans. And these guys weren't like Salcido was a walk-on, I believe, and turned into an All-American midfielder. So he's developed these kids that were not huge in the recruiting world early on in high school and into top-level All-American class talent.
He absolutely knows how to develop players. I mean, I wasn't even really looking to be taught, right? When, I'm a fifth year senior. You probably asked me at the time, like, I know almost everything there is to know about lacrosse that, could be, but he taught me some things that year that really made me be like, you know what? I don't know everything. There's a lot that I could learn.
As we're talking about Desco's in-game demeanor, one of the things I found hilariously funny because it touched on my coaching experiences was Coach Tierney. I don't remember how you worded it, and it wasn't regrets, because I picture Coach Tierney saying that he has regrets, but only saying that because he knows he has to, and not really feeling that regret deeply. But he had said, looking back, his answer, and this is paraphrased, was, I wouldn't have said some of the things I've said to the young men that I've coached. And I'm sure that if you were to make him, go deeper on that, he'd include officials maybe here and there, and maybe some other coaches and, and whatever. But I found that funny that Coach Tierney would say that, just knowing I've seen a couple of officials that I know personally that have told stories about him getting in their face and screaming, seeing it on TV. So I thought it was great that of all the people in the world that would say they've regretted some of the things they said, I was almost sad to hear him say that he regretted it. I want the guy to be a gangster and just have no craps given at all. And here the guy feels bad in his older age. Right.
I would, I'm speaking for Coach Tierney, and I know Coach Tierney only a little bit, not very well. But listen, Coach Tierney went to the same high school as my dad. He was a few years younger. And he went to the same high school, obviously, as a lot of my dad's friends who are also lacrosse players, and a lot of my dad's friends who are also referees in the college game. So I've heard stories, and I've seen, some of the things that he says to the ref. I would be surprised if he said that he regrets some of the things that he says to the ref, because I think it's part of it. It's his game plan. That's the way that he coaches. And he thinks that will get him a call or two, over the game, which adds to a competitive advantage.
It will. And it will. That's a fact. I figured he's saying that to you now, but that just this weekend, he's probably going to say a couple of those things that next week he's going to claim that he regrets. And I love that. I'm not slamming him at all for that. I love it.
Yeah, that's, I mentioned this a little in the podcast, and I don't want to get too much into specifics because it's something between, him and my family. But Coach Tierney has stepped up big time to help, without being asked, to help people in my family in a major way. He is he's a great guy. He's a great guy and a great man. And I would have loved to play for him. I wish that people would know that more about him, not say that he's got a bad reputation or anything like that, but he really cares about his players, and he's a good man first and foremost.
When you were talking to Pinnell, he mentioned something to you, or you mentioned something to him about once you got up to upstate New York, after being downstate, which is pretty much, downstate is civilized. Upstate New York is pretty much like the dirty South. And then below you guys is back into the dirty South. So what is it about New Yorkers that you and Rob Pinnell had that exchange? Like, oh yeah, upstate New Yorkers, they're a strange bunch. What, do we amuse you? What is it about us that you guys think is funny?
You're just different. I can't put my finger on it, and I'm not saying different in a bad way. That's definitely some really great people from upstate New York. It's just it's Long Island is one way, right? Long Island, Manhattan, we're one way. And when I'm growing up, especially, when you're in high school, you think everybody in the world is like you, right? Or the people that you grow up around, right? And it's not until you go another area where you start realizing, like, wow, there are different people in this world other than me. Now that's easy to understand when you go from Long Island, New York to Virginia, because you say, hey, Virginia's the South. People are going to be different there. And you've heard about, they're slower, they're nicer, speed wise, not mentally wise, but when you live in New York, or when you live on Long Island and then you go to upstate New York, you think to yourself, I'm from Long Island, New York. This is upstate New York. New York is New York. New Yorkers are all the same. They're going to be the same. And then when you go up to upstate New York, you realize, nope, that's not true. These people come from a totally different place and they act different than what I'm used to. Not saying there's anything wrong with it, not saying one's better than the other, but you realize real quick as a New Yorker that upstate New York people are definitely different.